Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast, where it's all about turning your job search into a slam dunk. Your host is Angela Copeland.
Welcome to the Copeland Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Angela Copeland. On the phone with me today, I have Marsha Warner in Portland, Oregon. Marsha is a career coach and full-cycle recruiter who collaborates with people to design a career that brings reward, meaning, and delight to life. Her clients range from college students to mid- and senior-level executives. Marsha, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, Angela, it's a real pleasure.
Oh, well, I'm so glad to chat with you. We've chatted before, and as I mentioned before we got started, I want to cover probably two main topics. One is ageism as it comes into our job search, and the other one is really kind of unexpected change in our job search, things like being laid off that we're really not planning for. But I think I want to start with ageism because I know that's a hot topic, and I know you've received a lot of feedback around that. So let's start out with a real simple question. Ageism, do you think it's a real thing?
Is it real? Yes, it is. Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that we don't really talk about. Age discrimination in hiring is not legal, so we don't really talk about it openly too much. But is it real? Absolutely. It's a subtle form of prejudicing.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And do you think it happens just when we're older, or does it happen at different times in our life?
I think at different times. You know, an older worker legally is someone 40 and older.
Oh.
So that's considered that's the legal definition. So it can happen, much earlier than what we would think of kind of as an older worker, i.e. 50 and up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, gosh.
I have a daughter who's 35 years old, and she told me the other day someone referred to her as someone who's an older worker.
Oh, dear.
So,
that's unfortunate.
Yeah. You're shocked.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think my very first job, I was 19 working for General Motors in an automotive, like in a Malibu assembly plant. And I remember when I first started working there, the plant manager went to my boss and said, "Who is this little girl and what is she doing with my cars?"
Mm-hmm.
And people would sort of like whistle at me or throw things at me in the when I was on the plant floor walking around because I was doing engineering, so I wasn't sort of like stuck in one location. And it was really uncomfortable for a long time to look so young and to be in a very adult environment. So I do think it happens at both ends of the spectrum.
At both ends, yes. And we might even think, well, that's reverse ageism, but absolutely. So, we can never control and predict other people's reaction to us. We can only be fully who we are in each moment. So that's, being 19 is not anything you could control or change any more than it is that being, 54 or 61 or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
is something that we can control and change. So, when I'm working with people, we talk about being fully who we are and embracing fully who I am and putting that in the most positive framework. And we all have things that we wish were different. I were taller, shorter, curly hair, different eyes, whatever it is, and age goes into that. But I can't control what other people, how they judge me. I can only project my most positive, full self.
It's a really good way to say it. And when I've met with folks, even if they're not worried about their age, they're worried about something. It could be their weight. It could be...
I don't have college. I have too much college. I have a PhD. I only went to high school. Whatever,
We all have like that thing that's kind of lingering. I rarely meet anybody that doesn't have something they're concerned about. But
agreed.
It's interesting. Last week I taught a class to a group of folks who was recently laid off unexpectedly. And a woman in the room raised her hand and she said, I'm in my 50s and I feel like people may judge me. And, I haven't looked for a job in a long time. Does ageism really happen? And someone else in the room who's a friend of hers spoke up and said, I don't really think that's happening. I really think people are going to value your experience. And I kind of interrupted and I was like, they may, they may value your experience. They probably will, when you present your best self.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that we're going to tell someone that ageism is just not a thing and to forget about it, I don't think that's realistic either. I'd rather face it head on and know that it's there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then take some steps to make yourself as current and as strong a problem solver. Organizations hire people to solve problems. And many people forget that when they're job seeking, their task is to describe how they best solve the organization's problems. Mm-hmm. And so we can reach with a big sweep in terms of how I approach problem solving and how the strengths, abilities, knowledge, skills, background, and also my grasp of current technologies. And those are the kind of things that we want to touch upon when we approach an organization.
Those are all good points. Well, so one thing, too, people often ask about is the resume when it comes to looking older. Is there anything we can do to look younger on our resume?
Sure. There's a couple things we can do. For one thing, many people, when they approach a resume, they feel like, well, I have to tell the reader everything I've ever done in my whole life, no matter what and when. Mm-hmm. A slavish autobiography of backward looking. Mm. Not true. A resume is a marketing piece, and it should. We want to market it or position it to describe how my background, skills, abilities, knowledge, education solve problems into the future. So especially from the top part where we talk about a summary and bulleted skills and that kind of thing, that's future looking. Mm-hmm. So we want to describe ourselves as a future solver of problems that can come in and really drive results in the organization. And then the bottom part, we can say, here's the credibility, or here's my experience that supports my ability to do that. So if I have, and I certainly on my own resume have things that I've let them go, I don't put them on anymore. They don't pertain. They don't pertain to my future anymore. If I want to bring that up, I can always in an interview say something like, something that's not on my resume, but I did want to bring your attention to is my experience with XYZ, which is kind of a fun thing to do in an interview. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it kind of wakes up some automatic thinking and behavior, saying, what's not there, but I did want to talk about. But with thinking about that and looking a little younger on a resume, we go back in detail 12, 15 years. We don't have to go way back, mm-hmm. nor do we have to put dates, particularly on education. Sometimes people have said, well, I don't want to put a date on anything. I don't want to put a date on when I had these various jobs. That doesn't work too well because logical mind of the resume reader will say, well, when was this? What was it?
Right,
so we don't want to distract them from the point. But particularly on education, we don't necessarily put a high school.
Oh, totally agree.
Those kinds of things.
What do you
that will anchor us in the past.
On the high school thing, sorry. I've talked to a number of folks who went to really impressive, boarding schools for high school or went to really impressive private schools. In your opinion, and I'm kind of on the fence on this, if somebody went to a really prestigious high school, would you make an exception, or do you still think it's high school, take it off?
I'd probably make an exception.
Okay.
I'd probably make an exception. I think brand. Is that part of my brand? Are my connections and the people that I know and connect with, would they want to know about that? Is there a part of that builds my brand? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so in those cases, if it supports the top, if it supports my ability, my connections, my background and skills, then absolutely.
Well, I think the most interesting thing you mentioned so far about the resume was that it is a marketing piece rather than a biography of your life.
Yeah.
I really love that idea because so often we feel like we have to document everything just so in detail.
In detail and tell everybody everything I've ever done. No, not at all. Mm-hmm.
So the points I've gotten so far, one was leave off the years on your education, but keep them on your experience, and potentially drop off some of your older experience if it no longer kind of pertains to the future.
Yes, if it doesn't illustrate my objective. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, Angela, as soon as I say that, of course, there are exceptions. I have a client right now who just recently completed her bachelor's degree. She's in her mid-50s, and she proudly just completed her bachelor's degree. And so her knowledge and the papers she wrote and her thinking is very current. So, in her case, we are putting a date on her college years because they don't date her. They demonstrate her drive, her current knowledge, those things. They're part of her brand, and they are part of her ability to solve problems into the future. So that's an exception.
No, that's very interesting. So you're probably trying to tell the story that she's been able to come back and be very current and recent.
Right.
Versus sometimes I've worked with clients who maybe they dropped out of school for a couple of years because they had maybe an unexpected pregnancy or something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And by putting their years, they're showing that it took them 7 years to finish college, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Like in that case, I would typically recommend to drop it off because they're going to have, the hiring manager will have questions about, like in their mind, they'll be thinking, now, why was that? And I'd rather not tell that story in the middle of an interview.
Not tell the story or bring their attention to it.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, is that relevant?
Mm-hmm,
is that
mm-hmm.
relevant to my ability to really just knock it out of the ballpark with this position I'm interviewing for?
Right.
Probably not. But there are things that around education, particularly around ageism in education, that we can point to. For instance, if I'm a big lover of Coursera, which is an online college, there's a word for them, online college, you can take college classes online.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For free. And there are wonderful career development classes you can take that will really demonstrate, particularly for older workers, that I am current, that I just took this programming class, that I just, that I'm working on my PMP or my management classes, those kinds of things. So in those cases, I would want to say, yeah, I am currently enrolled, or I just recently finished a college-level class in, XYZ, something that develops and demonstrates my current knowledge and my current development in particularly technology.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So, as we're talking, I'm thinking another question I get from older workers that comes up around the education section in particular. So I'll just give you an example. I'm located in Memphis, Tennessee, and we have a university here called the University of Memphis. But it wasn't always called the University of Memphis. Years ago, it was called Memphis State. And so I do get some older job seekers who ask me, should I put Memphis State because that'll show my age, or should I put the University of Memphis, which it wasn't called when I went there, but it's the same school?
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I've kind of debated back and forth.
Right. I would probably put the current name and then in parentheses, Memphis State, parenthesis, and like that.
Something, yeah, to maybe show both. That
Just in parentheses.
I could see that.
AKA, but I would not put the AKA on there, but just to indicate by parentheses that, what we all used to call Memphis State. But,
right.
Yeah, not necessarily put the date on it.
Do you work with clients as well on maybe like updating their email address at all?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, which email addresses are the ones, if you saw an email that you would say, you need to update that? Are there red flags for you?
Oh, absolutely. There certainly are, especially when I'm working with people on their brand. So, everything that we project is part of our brand. The tone of voice on telephone, my answering message on my voicemail, my email address, everything that comes from me says, here's my brand. So if I'm using an older technology, as my email provider. That kind of says I'm an older technology, that I'm not up with current technology.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the originals, AOL, Hotmail, even Yahoo,
Yeah.
they sort of say I'm kind of old tech. I'm old school over here.
Right.
And those are kind of old school. And also just the what your handle is on your email. I've had people that they use Grampy 1953,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. That's just so putting Nana or Nana loves the kids at AOL or something like that, which
Yeah.
I've seen. And on the other side of that, Angela, I've also seen Party Kitty.
Yeah.
So any of those, you want to really think about, is this my brand?
Right.
Is this how I want to identify my first impression?
Right. Right.
So in general, my recommendation is use Gmail, and a lot of people during a job search, they set up a specific email address and an email box just for their job search, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what's on their resume. That's what they check when they're sitting down and conducting their search. It's just for that, so it kind of stays at a different, special place away from all the other stuff we get in our email.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you have to get rid of your AOL email or that you can never check it again, but it's, just updating it to Gmail for the search at least.
Just for your search, for your this professional endeavor.
Yeah.
It's a professional tool. So it's maybe a tool I didn't need before, but I need to pull that tool out now while I'm getting this task completed.
Absolutely.
And then in selecting a name, something that's neutral, that is your name in some manner, and if your name is common and it's already taken, find some middle initial or something that is just your name, so that you're identified. You continue to emphasize your brand and your name, i.e., my brand is my name.
Exactly. I completely agree. And when the hiring manager goes to type your name into their email, whether it's Outlook or whatever program they're using for email, it's more likely to pop up when they type your name in if your name is in your email address.
Absolutely.
So I think
Absolutely.
that's really important. The other thing, which you mentioned, but you want to stay away from numbers that indicate your age. So I see a lot of people who will have like 1978 at the end of their email, and I'll say, "Are you 38 years old?"
Right.
And they'll say, "How did you know?" And I'm like, "You have to get rid of that."
You just told me. You just advertised. You just branded yourself around your age.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I just had a client who just did that, and so I encouraged him to update. He had something, Grampy something or something. So I said, okay, first thing we're gonna do that. So he came back and he goes, okay, I did this new one, and it's Joe Jones, 1954.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about this. Let's go back through this.
Let's do it again. But the good news is email addresses are free. You can point them all to go to the same place if you don't want to have to check them in multiple places. So
right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Very straightforward. You can get your Gmail forwarded into your regular. But, I kind of like the idea of setting up a particular email address that is and a delivery system that is just for your job. And it's like sitting down at when you were working at your old job. You had that particular email address, and you sat down and did your business there.
Yeah.
And I like sitting down, open up that email box, doing my business there.
Right. It keeps everything separated. I think you're right about that. So actually I have one last question about the resume that came up last week, and I was a little hesitant. I have an opinion, but I'm curious to see what you think.
Consult with us, yes.
Right. So when we go into an interview, we take copies of our resume with us, and we print those out at home usually, and we have different options for paper. And years ago, like 20 years ago, when I was looking for a job originally, there was this beautiful thick paper, and it was kind of this off-white color.
Pound bond cotton.
Right.
Paper, yes.
Yeah. So the group that I spoke with asked me, should we still be using this beautiful paper? And I'll tell you, my personal feeling was, I feel like it feels a little outdated. But what do you suggest for paper?
Well, I always kind of go back to some certain ground rules, and that is, I think, of brand. So is so we can think of some extremes. We wouldn't print it on our resume on pink paper with lacy edges and that kind of thing. That's
True.
not my brand, and which, believe me, I've seen. So if I hand that out, it feels like quality. It feels a little heavier in quality, but it feels a little dated.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I want to communicate subtly through tactile? What brand? What's my tactile brand? Through the feel of it. I think it feels dated. It's a little bit like people say, should I send an email or should I send a thank you note on a cute little note through the mail with a stamp? To me, that's dated.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We communicate email.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when I've been like talent acquisition manager and staffing director and that kind of thing, when I got those, I kind of, since I'm in a paperless office now, I don't know what to do with this now. Here's a thank you note, So what do I do with it? Paper? Yeah. So to me, it's brand. It's communicating current technologies and current communication styles. So I agree with you. I think it's a little dated. But we go back again to brand and what do I want to say about myself? You know what, Angela, I've had a number of instances lately where people entered their interview, they're ready to go, they have their printed resumes ready in case someone didn't, they need to pass them out.
Sure.
And as they sat down, everyone had their tablet or their laptops with their LinkedIn profile, and they said, "Oh no, we don't need a resume. We've got you on LinkedIn right now."
That's interesting.
Yeah. So organizations are moving away from resumes as a way of introduction and moving on to a LinkedIn profile.
I actually had that question just yesterday. The person said, "I don't think they'll go to my LinkedIn profile. I think they'll just look at my resume." And I said, "Well,
oh no,
I think they're going to look at both, if anything. I mean,
yes,
you got to be ready in both places."
Absolutely. LinkedIn is your primary marketing page. I love LinkedIn because you have a lot of freedom to depict yourself in LinkedIn that you don't necessarily in a resume. Resumes are written in kind of a formal, formulaic manner. And on LinkedIn, it's in first person. You can talk about who I am, what I love to do, what I think I'm really good at, what motivates me, what I'm interested in, what problems I love to solve, what I want to do into the future, in a much more free way than you do typically in a resume.
No, it's super important. It's very, very important.
Oh, yes.
Well, so
when we get back, and just touching again on ageism and branding,
Sure.
Let's talk, we need to have a current best practices created LinkedIn page to bridge across that ageism question.
Totally.
Saying, "Oh, I'm really not into that social media stuff." No. We need to use that tool. It's a big job search tool. Take that tool out and really polish it up.
And I'd say definitely on the LinkedIn side, you also want to be sure and have a photo.
Yes.
Because
essential.
I've seen folks that finally give in to the social media thing with LinkedIn, but then they refuse to put the photo, and it just still looks old. It just doesn't look right. Or maybe we have a photo, but it's a photo from 15 years ago. That also doesn't work because it's usually obvious, but then when we meet you in person and you don't look the same, it's a problem.
It's a problem. And if we know that companies are starting to use LinkedIn in lieu of a resume, and everybody has your LinkedIn profile up in front of them as you enter to do your interview, and they go, "Wait a minute, that doesn't look, So a photo is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And I think there's a psychological thing about putting a photo on as well for the hiring managers and recruiters. people love faces. We love to look at faces. We identify. We link in with faces. So it's important to say, here's who I am. And so, again, the thing we were talking about in our beginning of this conversation about accepting who I am. This is who I am. I'm the best possible me I can be at this moment. And that is reflected in our picture.
Right, absolutely. I totally agree.
If you want to, you get the best, most flattering picture and have a great hair day and, maybe you have a fresh do and, you put your best face forward. Absolutely, but it is your face.
So would you recommend that we put the photo anywhere other than LinkedIn? Like, would we put it on our resume or our business cards?
No. Or I've had people put them in their email signature.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, no.
I would agree. The only exception I see is for people who are trying to be like a realtor, and then, realtors put their photo on their business cards.
Well, they do. And it's a sales tool. I had a fellow who was very reluctant to take his photo off of his email signature, and he was a consummate sales guy. And so I just get back to brand.
Right. Totally. I completely agree. Well, so speaking of what we look like, because that's kind of what comes across in the photo, so say our resume looks great. We've kind of been able to shave a few years off there. We've dropped some of our experience. We've taken our graduation years off. But once someone meets us in person, it's really clear how old we are, and they're able to judge us at that point. Is there anything that you would recommend to help us visually minimize those judgments? Yeah, because of course you want to be the best you and you want to accept yourself, but you also want to be conscious of the fact that this is going on and how can I reduce it?
Yes, absolutely. So I have a little anecdote. I was talking to a woman the other day who's in marketing, and she went into an organization that was kind of a startup filled with a lot of, someone's called them hoodies the other day, but people that were pretty young. And so she was sitting down having her interview, and the owner of the company looked at her resume, concluding their conversation, he kind of looked at her resume and sighed and said, well, you look really good, and I think you could do the job, but I just don't want to work with my mother.
Oh, no way.
So,
gosh.
Yeah. So there's nothing she could do in that situation. He assessed her, as he sat and interviewed with her, as someone old enough to be his mother. And that's that. So I would say that she's in the wrong environment.
Right.
That he said to her something that's age discriminated, but he said, "We're not in the same ballpark. I don't relate to you as a contemporary." So I would say let's look in a place then where my contemporaries would be there. But yes, to answer your question, I think there's a lot of things we can do when we make that first impression. First impressions are incredibly important. So taking an honest, hard look at myself, I think, is where we start. And one of the things that people often want to do is to get fit and lose maybe a few pounds. That describes someone as fit and someone who's kind of fit and ready to go, subtly. The other thing is that oftentimes when I'm in job search, I feel like I'm so out of control. What I thought was the rhythms of my days and that I had this job and I was kind of in control of my life, suddenly that's gone and I feel like I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and I feel out of control with that. But there are some things I can control, and that is what goes in my mouth, how I'm now taking some time to care for myself and think of my own best physical well-being, losing some pounds, getting some exercise, getting out more, which I didn't used to be able to do when I was sitting in an office all day. So it gives us a sense of being back in control of myself. And also, of course, the other benefit of that is now I'm looking fit and with some fresh air and well rested, and ready and rested. So those are a few things that we can do, but just physically. But taking a hard look and saying, do I need to update myself? Do I need to get some input from somebody else about what's flattering on me? Have an interview outfit that is flattering, that I feel strong and enabled in, empowered when I put this suit on or whatever, and just have a good hard look. Do I need to update my haircut, my glasses frames, use some teeth brightening strips? What can I do to make myself my best possible self right now?
Right, absolutely. It's very much about like self-care, as you mentioned, and
it really is.
I think it not only changes the way people view you externally, but it probably also improves the way you see yourself.
Absolutely. And that's at the core. When I walk in, I feel empowered, to use that word, and in my strength. And my eye contact is clear, my handshake is strong because of that. So, one of the things that I work with people on are what Tony Schwartz calls, of the Energy Project, he calls the 4 energies that we all of us have: emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual. So, when I walk in, do I look physically fit? Do I look, emotionally stable? Am I intellectually acute? And when we talk about spiritual, I'm thinking of things like purpose and value. And is this meaningful work for me that will give me satisfaction?
Right.
So if I feel like I'm aligned with those things, then I'm presenting my best possible face.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. You make another great point, which is the out of control feeling. And interestingly, in the past, I'd say couple weeks, I have met a tremendous number of people who, at no fault of their own, were laid off. And it was typically a financial decision that a company made, and they weren't at fault, but it's still a very emotionally difficult situation.
Absolutely. We go through the same emotional reactions as we do in responding to any sudden loss, a death or any loss. Shock and denial, emotional reaction, all the things that we go through the loss of any loss, and that's natural. So to kind of deny it or push it down or say, it wasn't that big of a deal, it didn't mean anything, is maybe a second look is needed. No, it's natural to feel identified with our job and our company. Oftentimes people, when I do, and I've worked in the outplacement or career transition industry for years and years, and I have heard for years people say, it's not the job, but it's the people. I'll miss my colleagues, And so those are friendships that now have been affected, and that daily 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day kind of connection with people that I will miss and mourn. So one of the first encouragements I give to people who have come to a sudden loss is acknowledge that and deal with it. Feel it, let it, talk it out, be ready to know that I'm going to feel that way. And the people around me, my loved ones, I was talking to somebody the other day who said he's kind of okay, but his mother is just so mad at that company.
Right.
So the people that love us feel on our behalf. And so knowing that and helping them as I move through this as well.
I think
that's the fastest way to get back on track. Strangely, is best way through is go through it and move through it to get back on feeling emotionally centered again.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair way to feel, and it's a normal way to feel, like you said.
Absolutely.
And it's the answer isn't necessarily to look for ways to avoid those feelings. And I also even think, even if we landed another job really quickly, say the universe just happened to align with us, and the day after we were let go, something else popped up, it doesn't mean that the issue goes away. Like, you still have to process the loss of the first job, even if you have a second job.
Absolutely agreed. In very many ways, I think it's an error to end a job on Friday and start a new one on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's not through being laid off. But absolutely, taking the time to just process, if nothing else, process mentally, and what did I learn? What do I take with me from this?
Mm-hmm.
What did I really, what do I want to do more of in my next job? What did I love doing there that I really want to explore in my next position? Taking those kinds of just a self-assessment. That's where I start when I work with people, is to take a breath, step away for a moment and say, okay, where am I now? What do I want to do more of? What kind of problems inspire and excite me? What am I interested at this point? What do I want to learn more about? Do I want to take a class? Do I want to volunteer for a team at work? How do I want to grow next? And you can't do that if you just go pop from one to the next.
Right. It's really quick. Well, so one thing that happens when we start interviewing after we've been laid off is that very often the person who interviews us says, "Oh, so what happened?" Especially if it was a public thing and it was maybe in the newspaper that this company had a layoff. And even if it wasn't, oftentimes the hiring manager will want like the scoop, what happened. Do you have any tips for us on what we can say? Because it's such a tricky question.
Yes. I think that some preparation here is essential. First step is just what we were saying, moving through the emotional part of this so that when in an interview someone says, so what happened there? And I've had this happen, I burst into tears, or my bitterness and anger about it doesn't seep through. So first step to answer that question, what happened, is to be emotionally have moved through it. And then the second thing, I think, is to do some preparation. Come up with a statement that is 2 sentences long that just says quickly kind of what the situation is. And then last sentence, move us into the future. So, for example, something like when they say, so what happened with your last job? Explain, 2 sentences, well, as a result of a merger, my job was eliminated along with 8 other jobs in our department. They were centralized down to San Francisco. So that gives me an opportunity to reach out and do some investigating and talking with you today about this opportunity. I'm real excited and happy to be here with you today talking about this, that kind of thing. So a quick, here's what happened in merger or elimination or restructuring. My position was eliminated, and I'm looking forward to a future opportunity. Moves us out of the past into something current.
Well, I'd like to ask you one other question. And I've read a piece that you wrote for Max List that was really great. It was called Lessons Learned from the Recently Unemployed. And it was tips that if you were still employed that you maybe wish you had known before you became unemployed, like the things you would have done if you'd kind of known in advance. Can you share with us what are some of those things that we should be doing every day or every so often if we're currently employed that will help us if anything were to ever happen?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And that's really career management. It's taking some conscious actions and thinking long-term about my career direction and long-term goals and that kind of thing. So one of the things I suggest that people do is keep a copy of their performance reviews. And if I am in job search, it's important to go back through that, kind of look through some of the things that I accomplished.
Yes.
And then be able to write those key accomplishment statements out of that.
Right.
Another, I think, important element is don't just decide to network and get involved in LinkedIn, that kind of thing, only when I'm in job search. That's a ongoing career development process, is staying connected with people that you've worked with and also reaching out to colleagues in other organizations, staying involved in groups, in alumni association meetings, those kinds of things. And I know that so many of us, I know I should be doing that. It's kind of like, taking a vitamin. I know I should be doing it. I just kind of forget to do it. But
right.
When I find myself, I just had I know someone that just was laid off, and she reached out she had been doing some volunteer work and mentoring with others in her industry. And they, from her work and mentoring, reached out and said, "Oh my gosh, you're wonderful. Come over here and work for us."
Wow.
And it was just because she had been at the forefront and really involved in mentoring others in their industry.
Yeah.
And so it really helped her own career development unexpectedly.
That is really interesting. I think that's very typical for often how we find a job, but we don't think about it until we're sort of in job search mode, and then we're like, oh, wow, how did I ever find a job before? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually do have one last question. You are also, you've been a recruiter, and the thing about that, I get a lot of questions from people. They say, how do I find a recruiter or like a headhunter? How do I connect to them? What do I say? What would you say to someone who's just never worked with a recruiter or before? What should they do?
Okay. And you asked a great question that I would love to address on the questions that you sent me. For one thing, finding them is through referrals, reaching out to people that typically that you know in your industry that use or have been placed through a recruiter, get some referrals, or through LinkedIn. But one of the primary things I want to talk about with using recruiters is a recruiter is not your job coach and is not your job counselor.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. They are not. They are a marketing. They are there to market you.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to put your best foot forward every time you talk to a recruiter. They want to know that they can send you in and know that you are sharp and ready to interview and ready to depict your accomplishments and ready to talk about problem solving and ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had so many people say to me, "Oh, I would never say this in an interview, but my past boss was a real jerk," and off they go. Don't do that.
Right.
Recruiter is not a job counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So think of your recruiter, if you select someone to work with
mm-hmm.
as your marketing person, they want to know that you are ready to go and that you will represent yourself and them, because their reputation is based on the talent that they send in.
Mm.
So they want to know that their valuable reputation as a sharp recruiter is being reinforced by how well you interview and how well you present yourself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I totally agree. And they're only going to pick you to be the one they present if they really, like you said, if they believe in you.
They believe in you and they know that they can market you.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're only going to be, in the case of like a headhunter, they're only going to receive a commission if they are able to place you. So if you're going to embarrass them or damage their relationship with a company that they work with often, you're definitely not going to be someone that they would send in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And oftentimes people think that a recruiter will call around and find me a job.
Mm-mm.
I wish it was that wonderful. Someone will just do it for me and I just show up and it's all done for me. Mm-hmm. It's never quite that easy. A recruiter typically has they work for their organization or for the hiring company. They have a requisition. They have an open job that they're looking to fill. So they're looking for the talent that best meets the needs and definitions of this open position.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in the industry that they recruit for, and you have the kind of background, skills, ability, knowledge that they are looking to fill, with that position, we're good. Mm-hmm. But they're not necessarily going to call around and find you a job, and that's sometimes a disappointing realization by people.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way they're a little bit like a matchmaker. They're trying to make a positive match, but they still are there to help the company. Like,
absolutely,
that's their client.
Yes, they work for their client.
Right.
Absolutely, and it is very much matchmaking.
So, I mean, if you're a good match for their client, they're totally going to help you. And you know, you're a client in a way too as the job seeker, but it's different because they don't have the same level of vested interest in one person's job search as opposed to a relationship with an organization.
Absolutely. They don't have any particular investment in your job search. They have an investment in pleasing their client and making the commission. That's
Right.
how they make their living, you know. So but in working with a recruiter, find someone that you have a good rapport with and that works in the industry and in the job functions that you that are your career.
Totally. Well, Marsha, we've covered so many topics, but I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been so helpful.
Oh, thank you. I'm just so pleased to talk with you this morning.
Yes, and thanks everyone for listening. Thanks to those of you who sent me questions. You can send me your questions to Angela@CopelandCoaching.com. You can also send me questions via Twitter. I'm at Copeland Coach, and on Facebook, I'm Copeland Coaching. Don't forget to help me out, subscribe on iTunes, and leave me a review.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Coaching Podcast today with your host, Angela Copeland. Tune in next time to get more great tips on turning your job search into a slam dunk.